The conversations with my father will be in three parts. The first part focuses on early life and father's early employment working as a teenager at a private golf course that was frequented both by Robert Moses but also close associates of Moses who played significant and central roles in building the city as we know it. I'm interested in pairing these conversations with the quote that runs around the perimeter of the sculpture. It reads, "For a long time, this neighborhood was about what will be, and now I think it's about what is." And that quote's taken from a New York Times article from 2017, and the quote's from a real estate developer who developed at least two of the properties that are around the perimeter of Court Square Park. And I was very interested in this quote and how nebulous it is, and that it's also contingent on establishing a past, present, and future in relationship to real estate prices and real estate speculation. And I wanted to pair that quote with these conversations with my father to root the conversations in a life lived versus something that's nebulous and isn't contingent on anything other than real estate speculation. The first question that I will ask is if you could tell everybody where you were born.
Born in East New York, Logan Street, Brooklyn. January 1st, 1938.
New Year's baby. Tell us a little bit about how long did you live in East New York, and what can you recall, if anything, from the neighborhood?
Very short. We moved to Liberty Avenue in Richmond Hill. It was an opportunity to buy a house, one of those old big porch houses, and I was 3 years old.
And how long did you live in Richmond Hill?
About 5 years.
So, and at the time, what was it a working class neighborhood?
Working class, very typical. In most cases, wives didn't work, the mother didn't work, and we were able to get a mortgage. We got a chance to buy a place. I say we, I was still a kid, and my 5 brothers and sisters, and we moved to Queens Village, which is in Queens, which is a typical neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood. Once again, like a lot of neighborhoods, have become ethnic, particularly ethnic. Great neighborhood, people still, everything's good, and everybody living there is good,
And where is Queens Village if people aren't familiar with it?
That's out at, anybody knows where Hillside Avenue is? No? Okay.
I see a nod.
Anyway, it's a bus and a train ride from here, okay? But it's out just before Nassau, out in that area. And it was a neighborhood, and it was so much like this neighborhood when I first came here, okay? It was, we had a variety of ethnicities and whatnot, and I never heard any kind of racist in my whole life. Also, from my mother and father, I never heard that either. So that was a big part of it.
And so what age were you when you moved from Richmond Hill to Queens Village?
I would say 5.
Okay, so you lived there.
And I went to PS 135, which I walked to, and I had an older sister, 3 years older, and another sister a year older, and then going down the line, and we all went to the same schools, so the teachers all knew you when you came in, and we were Catholics. I guess if there was the school, they didn't have a Catholic school in the church, so we went to the public school, and which was just as well as far as we were all concerned. But, it was terrific. I mean, I had a good life. I don't recall anything like I was denied anything. And then I was, my mother was I'll just describe it as a difficult German woman, very smart, and you tried to figure out as a young kid what would make her happy. And I realized at a very young age, it was if you could contribute some money to the house. And money was tight. My father made a decent living, you know, in those days, but it was 6 children. Yeah, starting to work. Always did something. I had like a 10, a cousin came and he had a newspaper route. People were all too young. It was a pink edition of the News. It was a night edition of the News and Post. And they were I delivered them in 3-story apartment houses. I could run up to the one side, cross the roof and down. Bing, 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 bing. And he owned the route. I didn't even know this. Later on, I was like 15 and I got a check in the mail for like $450. He had sold the route and that was my fortune. I didn't even know. But it was something I found that I hustled. We called it hustling and making money. My mother was always happy. And then somebody came to me and said, you know, you can make some real money at the golf course if you. So I went to the golf course, which is now Douglaston. It's a public course. At the time, it was North Hills. It was a private club.
So if you don't know where North Hills is Queens, like starting to move into Nassau County.
Right on the border.
So about 20 minutes from here.
And it was a very upscale club. And I had a problem. I was born and late developer, very short. We have a history, and my father always said, "Oh no, you're going to grow." My father was big, and I, you know, I was 14 and I looked like I was 10. So when I went to the golf club, the first thing they told me, "Oh, you can't carry those bags, you know, they're too heavy." And they were a husband and wife there. They heard the man say that, and they owned P.C. Richards. Okay, that's how his sons now own it. His name was Al, and she said, "Oh, Al, we don't need the way we play. You don't need all these clubs anyway." And she took them out. So they only had like 3 clubs, and they would, every day they would come. I would caddy for them, and that was my start. And every time there was a chance, somebody said, "Oh, we need somebody to work out at the 13th hole to sell hot dogs on Thursday." I went out, and then when I got a little older, I had a brother 2 years younger. I had him take over that. And then I had the younger brother who was still small, and he was caddying. But I found out I got an offer to work inside the clubhouse. Now this doesn't sound like much. Inside the pro shop, cleaning golf clubs after people played and brushing their shoes off and putting them in bags and putting them in. And the man who was my boss paid me $35 a day. Now that was 70 years ago. And that was a lot of money. On top of that, he said to me, whenever we would have an outing and it would allow the public come in and play, like unions or a company, and they would drink after the dinner. Everything was on the boss and everything. And my boss said, "I want you to sell these tickets, what's lottery, for a set of irons. I won $100.
Golf clubs.
Golf clubs, I'm sorry.
If you don't know the lingo.
Yeah, $100 a set of irons and $100 for a set of woods. So sell them for $1 each. Anything over the 100 are yours." The first time I came home on a Thursday night, I said to my mother, "You know, I made $300 today." And my mother said, "Oh, great. How about sharing it?" I gave her $200. But it went on. I made more money. Well, I was making more money at the time than my father was making. It was all cash. When I was 15, I bought my own car. I couldn't even drive it. It sat in the driveway. I went to private high school, law school, college and law school, and paid, and always had cash. And that was, my mother always smiled. That was it.
So tell everyone about who were the people that were frequenting the club, and how did what was your relationship to these particular people?
Well, and the tie-in, like in most things in life, comes back later on in Long Island City. There were members, very wealthy, well-known people, and then there were people. I knew that they worked because I knew who Robert Moses was, but I had never met him because he never played golf. But I did remember once I was bringing some shoes to the front door where somebody's driver was going to pick them up along with his clubs, and I heard this real argument. And the voice, who I didn't know, the one was Eric Koch. He was the manager of the club. And he said to Koch, it turned out it was Moses, Robert Moses, he said, you know what, I'll have this club condemned and sold in 6 months. I didn't think anything much of it until it was condemned and sold in 6 months. It's now a public course. Years later, when I owned the bar here in Long Island City, I was in a place called Mandicotti's one night having dinner, and I realized from the conversation that this was Robert Caro with his wife, and he actually was with
Philip Roth.
And a very nasty man. Anyway, Caro, who's still active and still writing, and a nice man, I sent a bottle of wine over, and I said, I have some stories that you definitely didn't research, you wouldn't find in the New York Public Library. That's where he and his wife worked for 7 years writing that book. So he invited me to come over, and I said I really was lying, but I had some stories, and I told him stories because the chief engineer of all these projects he run was a member there, as his wife was. I also knew that the wife was having a fling with one of his other employees, and he said, "Oh, we have to come back again and meet you here." So they came back again for dinner, and he didn't bring Philip Roth because he just really putz. A great writer, but he was not much fun to be with. And
so tell us, my father is very shy, as you can tell. So tell us, who were the people that were frequenting the club that worked with Moses? And how did you learn about it? You know, later in life when you were reading The Power Broker, you had a kind of knowledge of who these people came to be.
That's actually where I knew that they had big positions. There's always a hierarchy in any place. And those that made money, they'll go from, kind of half a wise guy kind of guys who have inherited some business, bricklaying business or something, did very well. Didn't matter how. And then you had other people inherited businesses, car dealerships. And then the political ones were the ones that and if they worked for Moses, it was only, I learned this later, they were very quiet. They said almost nothing. And he would come probably once a month, and they would go in the dining room and they'd sit and, talk. He would talk and they would listen. And it was, I knew in my own mind that something was, I wouldn't say special, but something was happening, that these people definitely had power. The kind of power wasn't just that they got rich and they had a lot of money. When you talk about a neighborhood and the change and everybody, as soon as I heard they were waving around Amazon, money, big money, Amazon, I used to come from Long Island. We lived in Long Island, my family, and I would drive in the morning and I would park. There was parking spots. What's the French restaurant right on? The one right on Vernon. No.
Henri?
Huh?
Cafe Henri?
Yes. Okay. I think that was it. Anyway, that was a parking lot. There was a parking lot there, and like a lot of people, would park there and go get down the train, go to one stop. My office was in Grand Central, and over a period of time, as soon as that property was being sold, as soon as that was sold, everything started to change, and you knew. Now I said, boy, I might have come in here. I opened the bar at this time, but some foolish thing I wanted to do, which ended up costing me a fortune. But anyway, I opened the place, and everybody was saying, oh, Long Island City is going to be the hot spot. It's going to be, and I was the only new place. I built a new place, and 5 years out of business. And there are still guys in there today that came in for that reason, that were how the place was going to grow, and the only one that really did well was an Asian guy who sold bagels, on the coffee, bagels, and the papers over by the train stop. Everybody else ended up, their rents tripled, and these were, for the most part, New York people. They came here because it was a better deal rent-wise, and you'd watch them. They just went up, bought the paper, down in the subway. But they socialized outside, in New York. And then everybody said, oh, well, now they're putting up the buildings. But of course, what they put in the buildings were the same thing that the local grocer and whatnot was trying to sell. He thought he was going to, and the whole time, it never really, I know the value of the apartments went up, but it mostly forced out people who either thought they were getting a great deal, they were getting rich, but whatever it was, they had to go somewhere else where somebody was, paying a high price. And to this day, I live in Middle Village, and there's a guy who owns a bar, and he used to be a customer of mine. I didn't know he owned this bar, and I went in there, and he still lives here. And I met him on the street recently, and he said, thank God they didn't let Amazon in. He said, I've lived my whole life there, and I don't want it to be changed by Amazon. I don't care what Amazon says, Bezos says, it's going to change. If this affects you politically, so be it. But my father worked for a bank, and they made mortgages and lower income or middle income houses that Fred Trump built, okay? And as things went on, Fred was one of the nastiest men. He makes his son look like a nice guy, okay? But what my father did was, when they were building these middle income or lower income houses, they got part of the loan in stages. So they built the foundation. This was like Levittown and places like that, and huge places. And his job was to go out and see they actually did the work before they got the next stage in loan, okay? And Trump was like his son. I mean, his son was like his father, but it was always in doing business. He would finish whatever the job was, and if he owed the plumbers, let's say, $40,000, he would only pay them $20,000. Or whatever it was, he automatically cut it in half and said, sue me. Well, he knew that they all wanted to work for him. He was one of the biggest, So what they do, they swallow. But that was not something in my limited world that I heard from other people that were very successful and whatnot, that looked at that as anything but being a chisel and a con man. That's why you hear some of the same words used. And my own father used to say, he would say this about, he's long dead, but they don't steal it. And he didn't steal some of his, and that's my bias. Okay.
I'm curious just to think about early life, let's say leading up to your early 20s where you get married and move to Long Island, thoughts of understanding the city, and also as a young person having a life that's more relegated to Queens versus moving into the city, or if there's things that you want to talk about or memories that you have about a particular ecosystem of your neighborhood, or thinking about this idea of going to this golf course where there are people who are developing the city at large as we know it. I don't know, thoughts on that, the move between these spaces?
As a young kid, as I said, it was shocking to me to be able to make this money and come home and, Sunday night I would treat my brothers and sisters. My father would drive us to Jan's, it was an ice cream parlor, right? And things like that. So it was more, I wasn't that involved in other things. But I started at 15 working at the hot dog stand, like 3 days a week on the golf course. And I didn't even have a license, and there was a truck there, and I filled it up with whatever, drove it out there, and it's on a hill, and whatnot. And then I have my younger brother, Jim, working with me, and we sold hot dogs, and we made money. there was nobody I knew that was my age that was making a ton of money. And that's when being a little tiny guy was very helpful. You know, because they didn't realize it was behind that little guy was a devious mind, and he knew exactly what made people smile and throw an extra dollar tip down. You know? And I was good at that. I mean, whatever it was, I thought I was smart and shrewd. Some people might have said I was devious. It worked for me. But the idea that the whole connection of the neighborhood. By the way, the initial time I was sent to the golf course was because there were some guys I would see playing basketball in the park, and they were older, and they would let me play. And when I became old enough, I said, "Oh, I got my working papers," and they said, "Oh, if you want, you can go up to the golf course." And they worked. Most of them were firemen, and on their days off, they would go to the golf course to make extra money. And I was working. They were working, carrying 2 bags around for hours and hours in the sun and whatnot. And I'm telling you, I cleaned it. It was terrific. I was probably in better financial shape at that time than any other time in my life. Because that comes to the next part. I saw people with a lot of money, and I like to spend it. And I like to, when they talk about places or plays or books, I had an older sister, and, you know, set me in the right direction with great literature, and that was my big hobby, and I could buy whatever I wanted. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, too expensive, but I would buy a hard copy of what I liked, and all of that has such a big impact on your life later on. I went broke on the bar, which was right, you know, on Vernon and Jackson. It's still, I liked the neighborhood. What I liked about it, it was a regular neighborhood, and you could, you know, you had the local grocer and whatnot. And living in a high-rise, to me, never appealed. I did when they were building the first one, the high-rise here, the builders, there was a man named Vincent Albanese. He was the head of, he had a big job. And while I was in law school, I worked for he and his brother in a law firm called Albanese and Albanese. And the apartment, the most expensive apartment was $100,000. So my brother was very wealthy, and he lived in California. I said, you know, you come in, why don't you buy this place? But I hadn't mind, so I lived there. But he said, I don't need that extra headache. I don't know what they sell for now, but it's not $100,000.
Yeah, that's safe to say.